Greetings, fellow teachers of YouTube. Let's talk a bit about September 11th. Not exactly the easiest thing to talk about or to teach. Um, and I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience teaching it this year, because this is one of the few times where I've a actually specifically led a discussion with my students about September 11th. And it was a struggle to figure out how to teach it. When I was preparing for this lesson, my initial idea was to, do an internet search, find, and find a good reading for my students for that day. I was going to read it to them and then, kind of get their responses from it. This is similar to the lit circles that I teach, or that I organize for Youth Build. And then I was thinking I would, teach a section of David Foster Wallace's, 9/11, The View from the Midwest. This is an article that, I've read a couple times. I ran the David Foster Wallace conference for a couple years. And so I felt that it would be a good article for my students because, it's, you know, his view from Bloomington Normal, Illinois, which is where I teach, which is where all my students are from. Um, but I wasn't sure my students were ready for David Foster Wallace, and the article is much, much longer than we could do in the amount of time available. And so one of my concerns was if I have an article about September 11th, but only teach part of that article, then I could be giving my students the wrong impression about the overall message. And when it comes to a sensitive topic like September 11th, I don't think it's good to, truncate your sources with your students. I think there's a significant danger that you could, inadvertently create a very biased curriculum if you do that. Which is an ironic statement you'll see when I get to how I actually finally taught the class. Um, and so, because I was uncertain about the Wallace article, I decided I would search for narratives, personal narratives, personal recollections from September 11th itself. And, I was using Google search and I noticed a real problem with the search results. There were a number of, newspapers and magazines and websites that had, commemorative sites from multiple years since September 11th, like the 10th anniversary, the 20th anniversary, and you could tell that the the editors for these websites had the same idea I did. Right? They went out, they found individuals who had lived through September 11th, who had lived through the terrorist attacks. They had gathered those memories and shared them online. And they were all truncated. It was like there were, 2-minute snippets of someone saying, what it was like running away from the Twin Towers, or another minute and 30 seconds of someone explaining what it was like being a search and rescue pilot during that time and being one of only 12, flying one of only 12 aircraft in the skies over the whole United Kingdom. Uh, and they were very interesting vignettes, but they didn't give the whole picture. Um, and one of the concerns I have in teaching something like this, like September 11th, is that it's very easy to um, show the horrors without necessarily showing any thought. And many of these vignettes, I feel, were, you know, they were, they were taken from much longer interviews. You could tell that. And although they're, for the most part, they were good vignettes, they weren't giving the full experience of the speakers. They weren't really showing what September 11th was really like. They were only showing these snapshots of the worst moments. And September 11th was more than that. It was much more complicated than that. Um, and much more tragic than the most tragic moments, if that makes sense. And I'm not sure that it does. Um, I feel that there is a kind of, there's an emptiness, there's a hollowness, that you can only understand if you're looking at the complete picture of those who are, no longer with us. And I don't know that you can capture that if all you have is a couple minutes of, a snapshot of, someone's mourning from all those years ago. So, as I was going through the materials, I could not find any single narrative that I felt summed up September 11th very well. And I shouldn't say summed up. I didn't find any single narrative that was complete enough, I should say. I'm sure they're out there. I know they're out there. It's just that there are so many other news stories and other collections that it was, I couldn't find them in the search. I'll have to spend more time. I know they're out there. I will find them. But what I ended up doing in the meantime was I found my own reflections on September 11th that I had written in 2018. So 2018, as I mentioned, I ran the David Foster Wallace conference for a few years, and that year I took another read through of DFW's view from the Midwest, and I wrote a reflection about my own choice to join the military after September 11th, and how when the towers fell in 2001, I became swept up in some social forces that I didn't understand and I didn't even know to look for. I saw myself as being patriotic. I I saw joining the military to fight terrorism as being, far more noble than, say, um, graduating into the real world and looking for English jobs that weren't there. Um, and in the reflection, I talked about how, looking back from 2018 to 2001, my views of September 11th in 2001 and my choice to join the military had changed a great deal. I had a much different perspective. And what I noticed in rereading Wallace's work is that he had picked up on the strangeness of American patriotism in 2001. Even, in the weeks following September 11th, he was already noticing these undercurrents of, kind of you know, a kind of patriotism that was so unquestioning of itself that I feel it later became dangerous. And a big part of my reflection was the fact that, we used September 11th to justify invading Iraq. And, we know with certainty that Saddam had no role in September 11th. And what essentially happened is, we caused, because of September 11th and the 2,900 people who died, we caused the deaths of about 6,700 U.S. service members in Iraq, and another 500,000 or more Iraqis. So so in 2018 and today as well, I feel very conflicted about September 11th. I feel guilty about the part I played in contributing to this belief that America was justified in doing everything and anything to fight terrorism. And, I'm proud of my military service. I'm glad I joined. I feel that, it was noble in its own way, but it was not noble in the way I thought it would be. It did not, I did not make the kind of difference I thought I would make. And, one of the big things in that reflection that I talked about is that if I had been paying more attention to the world around me, if I had been reading more, if I had been more thoughtful, then I might have picked up on those parts of American society, and I might have noticed them rather than simply being swept up in them. And, this was the comparison I drew between myself versus David Foster Wallace. As a writer, in 2001, Wallace noticed and very presciently predicted that, American patriotism would go further than we understood. That the patriotism was doing things to our behaviors. I don't believe he could have predicted the wars to come, not that soon after September 11th. But he was certainly paying more attention than I was. And, I wanted my students to hear this reflection of mine, because I wanted them to know that, I wanted them to see that September 11th is a lot more complex than we often talk about. It's very easy to say, oh, we sent troops over and we fought terror. It's also very easy to say, oh, we overreacted and we charged into Iraq and Afghanistan and killed so many people. Those narratives are very easy to say, but to really look at the fear we experienced at that time, the rush to conclusions, the racism that resulted, the Islamophobia targeted against innocent people, people who had nothing at all to do with Al Qaeda, people who had no desire at all to hurt the U.S., like very loyal, patriotic Americans, were blamed for something that they had nothing to do with, that they never would have wanted. All because Al Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden, decided they were going to wage war on the U.S. And the online discussion of this actually went really well, I felt. I read the reflection. Other staff members added their reflections, and I think, got a very good discussion on Zoom about, the legacy of September 11th. But something that felt like a very emotional discussion for me yesterday, and I think for many of the staff members, turned out it did not have that effect on the students. It did for some students. The students who participated, for the most part, were pretty moved. As staff members, we talked with each other after the teaching, and we were all pretty amazed by how well the discussion went, by how much back and forth there was. My reading did what I hoped it would do. It generated thoughts, and it generated responses, but today, I was talking with students. We had we started a student council just today. I literally started a brand new student council today. And the students who were at the student council meeting, they were talking about how they felt the Zoom, our e-learning day, was not a good use of time. And as they were talking about how e-learning, they said, the students there said e-learning doesn't work. They were saying that they didn't get much out of the day, and not once did they mention the September 11th discussion. It's almost as if it didn't happen. And so my suspicion is that, as an instructor, I found a good reading. I found something, I found, like, my own uncertainties from 2018 helped other staff members feel comfortable sharing their uncertainties, their own doubts. But for students who did not experience that day, I think many of them either felt excluded, or maybe chose not to take part, or were simply distracted because they were at home on Zoom. And I honestly don't know. I need to investigate this further. I'll need to probably, I might put a survey together to find out. But I think it's important as a teacher to, know that you don't always have the answers. The things you think went well, your students might not agree. Your students certainly won't see things the exact same way. And so with September 11th, I think that's an especially difficult topic, which is why I wanted to do this video. Even though this video is probably a lot more rambly than usual. So I'm hitting the 20-minute mark on this. I'm going to have to wrap up. But as always, please leave comments if you have thoughts, especially if you have thoughts on how to teach September 11th, or if you have links to any good narratives from those who experienced that day directly. Please post those in the comments if you can. And with that, have a good day.